My name is Charles Guard. I was born here 73 years ago. I spent some years at university and so on, or College of Music, and I've been living here ever since. I came back to the island and got a job at the local radio station and have been involved in the history, the culture of the island ever since. Well, I was at Manx Radio, which was the first commercial radio station in the British Isles and is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. I was news editor, finally, and I was involved with reporting politics. I then worked for an independent film company and we made dramas and documentaries for Channel 4, BBC and so on. And then I ran a cultural organisation on the Isle of Man. And when I retired from that, I'm now retired. I'm doing exactly the same as I did before, it's just I'm not being paid for it. If I may just tell you a small anecdote, I was doing some filming with a French film crew last year about the Isle of Man. And at the end, the producers said, "How do we describe you?" I said, "Well, I'm a local historian." He said, "Oh, have you got a history degree?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, we can't possibly refer to you as an historian." So I said, "Well, you call me what you like." So I've got to be careful. I don't have a history degree, as French television has kindly told me, but I'm normally referred to as a local historian. I was awarded the MBE. Who knows why? They said it was for services to Manx culture. I was very happy to accept it. Well, I was born in a boarding house on the Prom, so my parents ran a boarding house and my grandparents did as well. So I was very much involved in the tourist industry, which in the 50s and 60s was absolutely vibrant. We'd had 670,000 people a year coming here, and our hotel was really humming. And I'm very glad to have been involved in that because it's all gone. It's completely different now because people don't want bucket and spade holidays anymore. They want to go to where the sun is, or if they come to the Isle of Man and our tourist industry is reviving, they come for the heritage, for the good food, the walks, the kayaking, mountain biking, all that sort of stuff. So we are repositioning ourselves. At the same time, we are known as an offshore financial centre. So we have lots of very successful businesses here, e-gaming, lots of IT, animation studios, bespoke manufacturing, polished lenses that go into space and all that sort of stuff. So there's a wide range of activities on the island. And of course, we have to make our own way in the world because we're not part of the United Kingdom. We're not part of Great Britain. We have to make our own ends meet. Well, historically, the Isle of Man is, as I say, independent from the United Kingdom. We're not part of the United Kingdom. We've never been part of Europe. Brexit meant nothing to us. We didn't have a vote. Right back to the 15th century, we were owned by a member of the British aristocracy. The King of England gave the Isle of Man as a gift to the Earls of Stanley and later the Dukes of Atholl. And this is profoundly influential for the island because that meant we have the ability to set our own taxes and to make our own laws. And in fact, our parliament, the Tynwald, was established over 1,000 years ago by the Vikings. And it is still running much the structure that they set up. We are, in fact, the oldest continuous parliament in the world, older than Westminster considerably. But during the 18th century, because we could set our own taxes and our own import duties, we attracted all the great trading ships here to the Isle of Man, who offloaded their sugar, their tea, their silk, and so on. And, of course, far too much for the local people to consume. So we had this great ruse of packaging it into small bundles and shipping it to England, Scotland and Ireland under cover of darkness. And it's generally known as the running trade or smuggling. And we were, I have to say, fabulously successful at it. In modern day terms, we defrauded or redirected millions of pounds of excise duties from the UK government to the Isle of Man. And eventually, of course, Westminster got really fed up with this. And in 1765, they passed two acts of Parliament in London. One was called the Mischief Act, and the other was called the Act of Revestment. And at that point, they revested the power back into the Crown of England. And the Duke of Atholl lost his title as Lord of Man, and he simply became a governor. And all the customs and excise that was collected here was shoveled back to the UK Treasury. And we never saw a penny of it for many, many decades. Long negotiations later, we gradually gained back control of this. But, they were really fed up with us, and they took action. There was a period in the late 60s, early 70s when we started to realise we could use our tax advantage to attract people here. Now, in the UK, they introduced a thing called surtax. We didn't. And surtax was punitive if you were extremely wealthy, because you earned £1 after a certain level and paid £1.20 or something like that. And it wasn't here. So lots of wealthy people came here, and they brought with them their advocates, their lawyers, their accountants, and unwittingly we started to become known as a tax haven. And lots of people, even famous film stars, had bank accounts here, because to begin with, you could earn all your income in England, but keep it on the Isle of Man and pay only Manx taxes. Well, that was a massive loophole that was quickly closed. But during the period of the 70s, we were known as the Wild West of the finance sector, because banks were being set up here with the very lightest of regulation. And frankly, they weren't banks at all. They had no collateral. They were just scams, I think. And in the early 80s, there was a massive bank collapse on the island. Millions of pounds went missing. Depositors lost all their money. The Bank of England sent in inspectors, and we were really harshly regulated. But now we have extremely good regulation. We're a top-class place. There's nothing untoward going on here. We still have a low tax regime, but to take advantage of that, you have to live here, the same as you would anywhere else in the world if you wanted their tax regime. So massively cleaned up our act, and we are now an offshore financial centre. There's always been some new way for us to earn our money. It was smuggling in the 18th century. And when that was knocked on the head, mining, actually, we had the biggest and most successful lead mines in the British Isles here. And when that was exhausted, tourism came along. And when that started to fade because people no longer wanted the bucket and spade holiday, they wanted to go to Spain in the 70s, the finance sector started. And along with that now, we still attract businesses such as e-gaming, because the Isle of Man is a lovely place to live. It's safe. You can be slightly off the grid here. There's excellent satellite and Wi-Fi connections around the world. So e-gaming has started to take hold here, along with all the other activities. In any society, there'll be people who are operating illegally, and I think you could say there are places in the UK where that might occasionally happen. Certainly there have been cases recently where there have been fraudsters, people doing internet scams. You can do that from anywhere in the world. But everybody was arrested and the whole business was closed down. As soon as anything like that is discovered, we don't let that carry on any more than anywhere else would do in the British Isles. So, yes, that occasionally happens, but it's dealt with as efficiently as possible. For years, I have been interested in making videos, and nearly all the videos I've made have been about the Isle of Man and its history, its culture. Mostly I did education videos because I wanted easily accessible reports of the island to be available to school children. But I have made lots of videos on our heritage, vintage transport, on mining, on music, on all sorts of things. And I still do bits and pieces and put them up there. I changed tack slightly in a couple of recent videos because I dared to point out a few aspects of the island that could have done with improvement, simply because it was raised in our parliament and somebody said that the tourist industry is about to start and we're not welcoming visitors. And I thought, well, I'll just pop out and film all this. And it's an easy target. I wasn't knocking the island. I just wanted to point out the rusty railings. And, you know, when I was a boy in the 50s and 60s, before the tourist season started, the island was painted, it was cleaned, it was immaculate, ready for the visitors. And that sort of tradition seemed to be lost. And what happened when I put it up on YouTube was an absolute tsunami of people saying, we agree, why can't we mow the grass? They're minor things, and clean the railings and stuff. And it's had about 130,000 views. I don't know who they are because we've only got 83,000 people on the Isle of Man. But anyway, I felt really awkward about it. And I'm not knocking people because the government, of course, has huge challenges and there's 1,000 things to be doing. But eventually the railings have been replaced and the grass has been mowed and, we're all the better for it. So I did a follow-up the year after and I went to some of the early sites to see what had changed. And even since the second video, there have been continuing improvements. But you've got to understand that you may think replacing a whole load of Victorian railings is an easy thing to do, but it's got to be budgeted for. They've got to be manufactured. You might need planning permission. You can't just do it overnight. And the government department responsible for that is responsible for all the ports, the airports, all the transport, all the roads, all the government buildings. How the minister gets up in the morning, I don't know, because pretty well everything ends up on his desk. So me wittering on about a few railings must have been really irritating. Well, Lord Street is an area of Douglas near the quay, which had housing. Eventually it was slum housing, Victorian housing. It was all cleared away, and they built a superb bus station there, which was the island's main bus station. You caught the bus to the airport. This is in the 60s. There was toilets and a shop and all sorts of things. It seemed to work. It was removed and demolished, and the site was left empty. And I remember in about 1987, when I was reporting the Tynwald sittings, our parliament, the new minister, announced to everybody that he had done a massive hotel deal, and a wonderful hotel was going to be built there. It would have a swimming pool with flumes. Now, we'd never heard the word flumes before, and this was wonderful. And here we are years later, and it is still a derelict site with a car park. Car park is not a proper car park. People are just parking their cars there. And honestly, the history of it is tortuous. I couldn't even remember how many different people have owned it. The Douglas Corporation sold it for £1 or bought it back for £1. I mean, it's just got very, very complicated. And like any big development, we've been promised and nothing has happened. But that's not unique to the Isle of Man. The economy everywhere is struggling, and we have had some excellent developments recently, but that site seems to have got very tangled up with all sorts of issues. And we are still waiting for anything to be built there. One project I might do is a book called This Nearly Was Ours, which would feature all the schemes that the island has been promised since Napoleonic times, actually. But recently, we've had endless architectural drawings published in the paper, the big new scheme here, the big new scheme there. And I don't know who these companies are. They must pay architects to do all this because that's not cheap. And mostly we never hear of them again. Now, what attracts them to do this, I don't know. Maybe it is trying to capture money for investment. Some have worked. There have been some superb buildings done, but the majority we're still waiting for. And I don't always agree with the architectural designs, but then I'm a bit of a conservationist and a member of the Victorian Society. Not that I want Victorian architecture to be endlessly reproduced, but I do think that sometimes the designs are a little insensitive. That is a personal opinion, I do understand. But what is it that stops these buildings being built? Well, that was an old building. I think it's late 18th century, and it's been there. Well, obviously, it's in all the old photographs, on all the old plans, and it had got into a poor state. And a developer bought it and wanted to demolish it and replace it with something along the same footprint but much more modern. And he ran into quite serious difficulties with the planning committee. He spent a large amount of money trying to sort it all out. I think I'm right in saying that since he bought it, it's been registered. He wanted to demolish it, but as it was a registered building, which is the Manx equivalent of listed, the inspectors have turned it down. He's taken it to appeal, and his appeal to have it demolished has been turned down. So I think in exasperation, he offered it to the government for £1. They naturally declined it because they didn't want it either. And the tragedy is when those buildings are in that situation, if you can't demolish it, and he says it is not viable to repair it, it will just sit there. And if you look at the situation there, he's put a sign up saying, sorry, this is not going to happen. It's got hoarding around it. Weeds are growing out of it. What is the future? We just don't know. The idea of footfall on the island is a complex issue. The government's proposal is that we would increase the population from the current about 83,000 up to 100,000 because economic activity is what will make us boom. I don't think there's any less people coming here. In fact, the tourist income is growing because that is really working. But anything on the island has to have that footfall. It has to have the local people who want to consume. If you want big stores to come, they have to be here to spend the money. And the thing that brought Douglas out of a difficult period in the 80s was the economic and the business boom. Lots of old buildings were demolished and excellent and splendid office blocks were put up around Douglas. That seems to have slowed down for the moment. But then the UK economy is not sparkling as it once did either. And we, of course, are affected by all of that. So I think it's just a British situation. And we are all hoping that the economy is going to pick up at some point. But there are massive costs, massive problems. There never seems to be just quite enough money to run the world. There's a lot of innovative social stuff going on the Isle of Man. And people say, well, all the young people are leaving. I don't think they are. There was a time when they were. But with the finance sector, the gaming, the IT, all these things that are happening, I mean, the students go away for university. They may get a job in the UK for a few years, but then they'll come back. And having a bit of outside experience is no bad thing. There's a lot more for young people to do here than there ever was. So it's a misconception to think that, we're the back of beyond and everybody's leaving, because they're not. Our offering to tourists has been completely realigned in recent years. We have, as I said, the oldest continuous parliament in the world. We have a unique camera obscura. We have the biggest water wheel in the world. We have the oldest electric tram system in the world, the only surviving horse trams in the world. Fantastic Victorian heritage transport that thousands of people come over for every year. We have cruise ships coming in through all the summer and coach parties. There's hiking, there's kayaking, there's mountain biking, there's great food. There's lots of self-catering apartments. So our tourism offering has been completely realigned. And if you like heritage, we've got medieval castles, we've got Neolithic burial sites and Bronze Age hill forts. There's absolutely everything here for people. You can spend a week and your feet don't touch the ground because there's so many things to do. So that offering is really exciting. And the money that's coming in from that is helping keeping those places going, and the locals are using them all the time as well. We love all of that, and the island has a tremendous amount going for it. Apart from, as well as its gorgeous scenery. Just come through Liverpool. Yes, you might stop off for a night, but get on the boat and come here. I think you'll be very impressed. I've just been with some Irish people today who are friends of friends, and they got off the plane a couple of days ago. They just couldn't believe how beautiful the Isle of Man was. And I agree with them. It's sad that we don't get the 670,000 a year, but our tourist figures, probably over 300,000 are now coming on an annual basis, which is brilliant. It's good for the economy. And of course, we still have the motorbike racing. The TT, the Tourist Trophy, is a massive event every end of May, early June. 40,000 bikers are over here. And that is an astonishing event. There are very few places in the world where you can witness bikes in some areas going over 200 miles an hour on ordinary roads. The roads are closed, of course, but they are ordinary roads. It's a very, very exciting event.